Hello, everyone. I wanted to make a video kind of perhaps summing up or giving some direction to what we're doing in the first part of this course. If you look at the course outline, you can see that the first 3 weeks constitute part one of the course, the conventional approach to issues in computer ethics. What I would like to focus on here, or think about as being the theme of part one of the course, is using these so called traditional ethical decision making models to make sense of or to evaluate the ethical issues raised by autopilot and the Facebook experiment. Of course, what that presupposes is that we have some grasp of what these traditional ethical decision making models are. They are utilitarianism and Kantianism. And what I've given you in week one is a very brief, but I hope adequate introduction to utilitarianism and Kantianism as ethical decision making models. As ethical theories, we would have to spend weeks and weeks reading Kant, reading different utilitarians to really get a grasp of it. But what I wanted to do is just to give you a quick and dirty introduction so that you could use these moral theories right away. That is, use them, apply them to real world issues like autopilot and the Facebook experiment to see what kind of help they are in sorting out the ethics. So you have to read them. I mean, and I would say look at the videos. Basically, we have an approach. We have an approach in utilitarianism in asking about the consequences of the issue on human happiness. The most sort of pared down, bare bones question that a utilitarian asks about any action is, does it maximize the possible happiness in its consequences? And does it minimize the possible unhappiness in its consequences, so that decisions are made on the basis of consequences, and the consequences that matter are the ones that either increase human happiness or decrease it. And that is the overall happiness and unhappiness of every person or human being, let's say, who is actually involved, that is, who has an interest. You, I think, a utilitarian should feel free to ignore the welfare of anyone who is not affected by an action. So to have an interest in some action is to be vulnerable to it in terms of your happiness and unhappiness. If the thing does not affect you, then you can be ignored. So um, that means that the individual has to take into account their own happiness and the happiness of everyone else. But the idea is that you do it in this impartial way. So that provides you with a rough and ready way of evaluating issues or sorting out the ethics of issues. We have to anticipate the effects on ourselves, the effects on everyone involved, and try to calculate those effects, again, in a rough and ready way, and be committed, if you are a utilitarian, to the idea that the best course of action in any particular case is the one that results in the most happiness and the least amount of unhappiness. It's a very simple sort of thing. And what I'm asking you to do is to think about that in relation to these two issues that we'll be looking at in weeks 2 and 3. To look at it as a Kantian is quite different, because the Kant, and it is very, very important that you keep in mind the reading, which is essentially the two categorical imperatives. The idea that there are two rules that must always be followed, no matter what. That we that in a certain way exemplify or represent our duty in any particular situation, and that is, on the one hand, the first categorical imperative about universalizability, that whatever we do, we must be able to will that our rule of action, our maxim of action, can serve as a law for everyone, which can be put in different ways, but that's essentially it. And the second categorical imperative, on the other hand, that whatever we do, we should always treat other persons as ends in themselves and never as a mere means to one of our ends, which can be put in different ways, but that's essentially it. All we're doing in the next 2 weeks of the course is looking, first of all, looking at these issues. You sort of get a handle on what the ethical problems of autopilot would be, what the ethical problems of Facebook experiment actually were. But I'd like you to keep in mind these two moral decision making models, utilitarianism and Kantianism, and really ask ourselves whether either of them actually helps us to come to some decision about the ethical issues involved.